You guys hanging in there? One more. Relatively painless. For you. Okay, so my project, as mentioned before, is Cottonwood Dynamics along the Grand Valley Assessment for Restoration Guidance. This picture right here is taken from Horsesea State Wildlife Area, where I worked a little bit this past summer and prior to this past summer. It's managed by Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Right there you see the Colorado River meandering its way through Ruby Horse Thief Canyon, Westwater Canyon in Utah, and beyond. And then here you have a nice shady old grove of cottonwoods that provides some respite on a hot summer day. So an overview, background is that I've been kind of involved in riparian restoration along the Colorado and along the Gunnison to a certain degree over the past 2 years prior to this program and during this program, and hopefully beyond this program as well. And I've seen a lot of projects that have been successful, and I've seen a lot of failures. I've been involved with removal of invasive species, tamarisk and Russian olive, and I've come back the following year and everything's resprouted and regrown. And I've also been involved with cottonwood and willow plantings and other native plantings. Come back the following year and everything's been dead. So basically I was trying to figure out how we can work within natural systems, particularly for cottonwoods, and figuring out the patterns, the kind of behaviors, the conditions that allow them to thrive naturally. So then we try to influence these systems as restoration practitioners, that we work within that system and we have higher levels of success. And then through conducting this research, basically an assessment of all the cottonwood population within the Grand Valley, I could share this information with land managers and they could use that for various restoration projects. So the Freemont Cottonwood itself, this is kind of an overview of its range, common throughout the Southwest all the way into Mexico, mostly growing along main river corridors and ephemeral tributaries of those main water channels. They have a very unique dependence upon hydrological cycles. They are tied to precipitation, to stream flows, and to snowpack most significantly. How water flows, deposition after flooding determines where trees in general are going to grow and where they are not. It's considered a keystone species of riparian habitat. Basically, it kind of represents a sort of riparian forest in areas that could be completely devoid of vegetation and wildlife in other areas. So wildlife generally flocks, congregates in a lot of these river bottoms. They use channels for migration, forage, shelter, and everything else in between. There's also an ecological service that these trees provide as far as bank stabilization. They reduce sediment runoff, erosion, and they provide cooling of water temperatures, which is crucial for a lot of desert fish species, and generally enjoyed by ranchers, boaters, recreators for a little bit of refuge from the heat. So these are some threats to its range. Basically, a lot of cottonwood populations have been in decline for the last half century, maybe even longer. And the main one here is dams and diversions. We are basically pulling water from all of these systems, and the removal of that water creates lower water tables, less flooding events, lower flows in general, which prevents natural recruitment, natural establishment of this plant. Once you remove water for the municipal reeds or agriculture, in Colorado you're looking at 80% of water consumption goes towards agricultural purposes. Then you have a rash of invasive species that sort of fill that void, fill that niche that's been vacated by cottonwoods. Other factors are definitely climate change, where we're seeing significantly less snowpacks year in, year out, which means less flooding, less water in the river. And then you have channel incision, which Sam touched upon earlier, where it's kind of a self-perpetual degradation cycle, where the channel keeps getting cut deeper and deeper in, and then your bank on the side will have less access to water tables, and that makes it more difficult for cottonwoods to grow. So these are some of the effects and responses of these type of threats and challenges. Basically, this is common right here, where you'll see this is an old cottonwood grove that is basically dying out. You're seeing no regeneration along the floor. Basically, there should be the next generation and subsequent generation of cottonwoods naturally establishing through seed fall and through natural production. What I've been involved with a lot, as I mentioned before, is removal of invasive species that fill that niche. But I think the critical approach now that's being developed by a lot of restoration practitioners is a full comprehensive strategy that involves revegetation. Because just to remove tamarisk and Russian olive and not do anything in return is basically you're going to be having the same problems as you did before. So to focus on revegetation, we've kind of gone to some drastic measures. This is a project that took place on one of my research plots that I'll get to in a bit. But he has to dig down to find the water table and plant these trees in order to make them survive over a long period. And I think as we touched on all before, that a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of energy and resources are going towards riparian restoration, environmental restoration in general, and we're not always seeing results. So the purpose of this study is to try to make things more successful and keep that excitement alive. The Grand Valley, where I live, this is kind of Palisade right here. It goes from Quebec up on the north of the canyon all the way to Loma, which is close to the Utah border. And it's an agricultural community where diversions are common for agricultural production. It's also an area where a lot of restoration is taking place through a variety of organizations. So it kind of set the table to be a good laboratory of sorts to experiment and share some of this information with people that are involved in restoration. And there's a lot of public and private lands that I think share the potential. This is kind of more of an overview here. This is the whole Grand Valley that's framed by a lot of these irrigation diversions. Here, this is where a lot of the water is pulled out by a roller dam, by Cameo. And then it's pumped to higher elevations, and everything's gravity fed back towards the main channel right here where the Colorado flows. You can see the red markings are where concentrations of cottonwoods have been mapped by CPW about 5 years ago. And most of them are growing right along that central channel in that main corridor. And then you see some growing along natural washes and diversions from return flows that I'll touch on in a minute. So the project itself kind of consisted of 3 parts. The first was going out, identifying where there are cottonwood groves. And I focused on some properties, mostly through CPW, that was my project sponsor, and they have 5 properties that I visited, and also 2 with BLM, and then several township, municipality, local parks, to find cottonwoods and then core them using an increment bore where I could remove a core sample, then I could date it, label it, and then I use mapping techniques to pinpoint the exact location of this tree with sub-meter accuracy, and sort of a software called TerraFlex that allowed me to categorize, label everything, measure it, and organize. Then I took these samples back home, looked at them under a microscope, and there you could see these individual tree rings that indicate a particular year of growth. So the original objective was to look at these trees and determine the exact year of growth, the exact year of germination that happened for this tree. So I could look at the sample and be like 1943. But there were some problems there because the rings of cottonwoods are a little tricky to read. They can be faint, there's false rings, and there's also issues of herbivory, a lot of beavers hitting these trees when they're young, deer and elk, browsing, and then the distance to where the samples were taken. So to get the exact date was a little tricky. These are kind of my closest approximations of those dates, and I think it's important to sort of look at these results in groupings. So in total, 79 trees were mapped and cored and sampled over 9 different properties as mentioned, and DBH ranges from 14.9 to 72.2, and the oldest tree I found was 1906. So if you look at this data, you see some kind of spikes in 1984, 85, 86, again 91, 92, and then again in 96, 97, 98, 99. See, you know, how random this truly is not necessarily proven to what maybe I would have liked it to be, because I go to areas and trees will grow in concentrations. They tend to germinate at the same time period. So a lot of times I'd be taking samples from one particular site, and a lot of these trees were the same age. But there definitely are some patterns here, particularly when you compare it with hydro data. This is a stream gauge close to where that main diversion is up by Cameo. And this determined the peak flow, the volume for each year. And this is critical for cottonwood recruitment. They depend on a massive flooding event, and then when those waters recede, all of their seeds will germinate in these kind of broad alluvial deposits that come from the braiding of rivers and these massive flood disturbances. So when you see these high water events, basically in '85, that's when you can expect some recruitment. So there's some connection there. Probably even more connection with snowpack. This is where you can see super high snowpack years, particularly in '84, '85, again spike in '90. That green line represents June snowpack, so that would be later into the year with higher levels of snow. So in mapping, you can kind of see some results of recruitment at different times when water was reaching different levels. So up here you have kind of an older stand from '84 and '86, again here. And this is likely when the river was flooding at a higher level, probably even filling this back channel right here. Now more recruitment tends to concentrate along the river's edge, closer to the main channel. This is some more samples that I mapped, and I put in 2-foot contour intervals to basically give micro-topography of this area. So these areas are basically 2 feet lower than these areas, and it's that little difference that can allow cottonwoods closer access to water table and prolonged rates of survival. Here is kind of a back channel that's going to hold water longer, and throughout the year it represents prime land and location and sites for planting. So new strategies that are emerging. This was a contract that was awarded to one of the properties I was working on to a contractor. It was about $500,000 to plant 8,000 cottonwoods, 3,000 willows. And partly awarded to him because he's pioneering some new sort of approaches that look at groundwater depth, which is critical for cottonwood survival, and accessing that water table depth even as it recedes, and that contact of roots with consistent moisture allows them to survive. So basically he mounts a little stinger or a probe onto his excavator, drills down, looks for water table. If he hits it, boom, he plants right there. He also, along with my project sponsor CPW, has been sort of focusing on back channels right here, these little areas that will flood and hold water throughout the year, and then looking specifically at the north aspect, the north-facing slopes right here that will retain moisture longer, given snowpack and given exposure to sunlight. And I think all three of us and some other practitioners in the valley are starting to value snowpack levels and really incorporating that into planning a restoration project, which is kind of what the focus of this project for me has really been. Kind of a side channel that I got off on as a attempting farmer. Basically, agricultural in general has been somewhat pretty much detrimental to cottonwood recruitment in the Grand Valley, but there's been some hope and some indication that there are some positive benefits, particularly in a lot of these return flows where water is being pumped up high and eventually it's making its way back to the river somehow, some way, and it will follow draws and little ravines and little canyons. And you can see here some older cottonwood trees growing along a historic agricultural ditch. I mean, this is 20 feet above the river channel. Cottonwoods probably elevation-wise shouldn't be there, but because of that ditch, you have the potential for recruitment that you otherwise wouldn't. And I think that's something I've begun working with CSU. They have a seedling program that works with landowners promoting conservation and distributing seedlings to plant on their own property. And I think that offers a lot of potential in the future for expanding habitat that wouldn't otherwise be there. And then, yeah, this is kind of an overview. I've been fortunate enough to work on a lot of these projects with some really good people in really great places. Here's Montrose clearing some Russian olive and tamarisk. This was a planting project here at Ruby Horse Thief. And then this is a contract I got with the Delta Resource Conservation District by Paonia and Hotchkiss, actually. So I think, beyond the obvious environmental and ecological benefits of a lot of this restoration work, I think there are a number of economic, community, cultural, social benefits that are hard to see at first, but I've been able to witness them. And I think the important thing is that to keep funding going for this, to keep energy and resources available for these type of projects, that success needs to be increased so people can come back 5 years and say this was effective. And then you create these ecosystems that are self-sufficient. And hopefully we can do that with some of this research. Yeah, questions?
Yeah, Ross, you mentioned a tempting farmer. There's a lot more to your background, and some of this you've talked about as an extension of your own private business.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about how you see your future with merging agriculture and restoration and public and private? And
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's been a huge driving force for a lot of this research for me. Is that, you know, I think a lot of times agriculture and conservation in particular seem to be butting heads, and there's not necessarily a happy medium. But I kind of, through some of this research through this whole program, I've begun to see things a little differently, where I think agriculture and conservation can actually coexist with a few changes on both sides. You know, I think conservationists have to view a lot of farmland as potential habitat for creatures of all sorts, and I think farmers have to sort of tolerate and invite wildlife into their property as long as they're not that detrimental. And this was something I talked a lot about with CPW because they deal with kind of that crossover. But I don't think the lines are as distinct as people would like them to be. And I think there's a lot of potential to sort of meld attitudes and bring people together across sometimes what appears to be stark divisions. And yeah, I hope to continue with that privately, get contracts and put people to work if I can, and implement some of the stuff that has long-term effects, hopefully. Butch, yeah.
Yes, you mentioned that the beavers tended to nibble on some of the sprouting cottonwood. On the other hand, some people are using beavers, and I didn't know if down where you are, they're using beavers to basically raise the water table underneath so that it reaches the cottonwood roots and that kind of thing. The other thing that I'm wondering about is, one of the things that several people have talked about to me is the utilization of willow hawthorn, particularly up in the Gunnison area. The spikes on it are such that nobody bothers it. But it protects a lot of the different species of willows and might protect the cottonwoods from being nibbled by just anybody.
Yeah, and that was another factor of the study, is that there were some cottonwoods I came across that had protection around the base of them. So they had, like, usually chicken wire.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely works. But it kind of made me, you know, it might have skewed the results slightly, where a lot of trees potentially could have been germinating, growing, and thriving over time periods and then getting chewed down. And some of these other trees probably survived longer because they were protected. So it's definitely a factor worthy of consideration. Yes,
We've kind of talked a lot about the actions, like direct actions you're doing to restore these places. Could you kind of maybe go into more of the planning stage too, of how you prioritize and where to do this, and kind of the blending of the action and the planning with the practices?
Yeah, that was kind of tricky, just figuring out where I could even be conducting this research sometimes. And recognizing areas where, like, sometimes I would drive 45 minutes to a site, you know, and there'd be like no cottonwoods there. And that would be a waste of a Saturday pretty much. But yeah, I think the planning is critical. That's kind of what I want to focus on too. For a lot of these projects, it's like, let's just start getting stuff in the ground, and we'll see what happens, you know. But I think the future has to be, particularly land managers, identifying where these sites are going to be optimal, like looking at microtopography, looking at where there might be back channels, even soil types is something I'd like to look at later on down the line, and figuring out where is this going to be most effective. And that if the planning increases, and also based on snowpack, you say we're going to have a high snowpack year, so this could be, we could probably plant a little deeper, a little further back away from the channel, or it's bone dry like 2012, maybe we don't even plant this year, you know. And I think that planning component is critical to improve the perspective on all of these things and the success rates.
Gwen's online, and she wanted to hear a little bit about the outreach methods that you use to garner community or stakeholder support for the project.
Yeah, I mean, I was in touch with a lot of people that are involved with this. So it's Tamara's Coalition, it's Candyland Association, it's BLM, CPW, National Park Service, NRCS. Those are the main kind of stakeholders and people that I dealt with, and Western Colorado Conservation Corps, which I worked for too, were all people that are actively involved in these type of projects. So I touched base with all of them prior to sort of engaging in this project and seeing what they would like to have improved upon, information, and then I touched base with them afterward. I sent this report to all of them, and I got a lot of feedback on where they thought this would be helpful and where they would like to see the project developed further. I think